When the Nazis came for the communists, I kept quiet. I wasn't a communist. When they came for the trade unionists, I kept quiet. I wasn't a trade unionist. When they locked up the social democrats, I kept quiet. I wasn't a social democrat. When they locked up the Jews, I kept quiet. I wasn't a Jew. When they came for me, there was no one left to protest. You may have heard this before, this little poem, and it may sound different. That's because I'm reading the direct translation from the person who wrote it himself, Martin Niemöller. He was a German Lutheran pastor talking about what happened with the Third Reich. And that's what we're talking about today. Actually, no, today we're talking about one of my favorite badass women of history, Lyudmila Pavlichenko. But before we get into that, there are some other things I want to bring up here, simply because I'm interested in history. I'm interested in the way the world works, the way the human world works. I guess that would be sociology. I'm also interested in history, and I'm a bit interested in economics. And I will say, no one understands economy or economics less than economy bros. I guarantee you, no one understands economics less than most of the people who study economics in the US. And there's a reason for that. There's a pretty easy to understand reason for that once you understand some actual definitions of things and actual history here, which I'm going to talk about in today's episode of That Thing with James, a podcast about nothing in particular. I'm your host, James. Hello. Welcome to the show. This episode might be a little heavy, but it's history. I'm just talking about history. That's all. I'm sharing history here. Nothing more. That's all I have to say. There's, surely there's no overt point to what I'm talking about in today's episode. I'm just going to talk about history and one of my favorite badass women of history. But, you know, it is what it is. I don't have a script for this show. I don't really plan it out. Sometimes, like today, ahead of time, I'll pull up a bunch of resources and pick and choose. This is a fly by the seat of my pants affair, and I do it all by myself, and I am beholden to no... I don't do commercials other than, well, this is a commercial for myself. I'm beholden to no corporations, nor am I trying to appease or become beholden to any corporations, nor am I trying to win the favor and support and approval of the servants of corporations. Maybe you catch my drift. Who could possibly be the servants of corporations? And do they directly work? Are they on the corporate payroll outside of, say, election funds given? Donations from corporations? It's pretty early in the day. It's Sunday, September 21st. A lot has been happening the past 8 months. September 21st, Sunday, 2025 is the day of this recording. This episode will come out the following Friday, so who the hell knows what is going to happen between now, as I'm recording this, and then when I release this episode? Who the hell knows? Because it's been fucking crazy. Yes, I say fuck words in this show, so I use harsh language sometimes, and that's something to know. If you've already been consuming this podcast, you probably know this already. If you're new, hello, welcome. I'm James. This is my thing. Well, it's one of my things, but I titled this That Thing with James. So if you hear this and if you like it and you tell some friends or family about it and say, oh, have you ever heard of That Thing with James? They're like, what thing? Oh, it's that thing. See? It's a play on words, That Thing with James. And you can help support this thing by becoming a patron, because as I said, I don't get any money from companies or anything, and I do this all by myself, except for the support of listeners and or viewers like yourself via my Patreon at patreon.com/thatthingwithjames. To those of you who are already patrons, thank you so much. You rock. And if you're interested in supporting this show, become a patron at patreon.com/thatthingwithjames. In exchange for your patronage, you will get access to a lot of bonus episodes, over 120 bonus episodes as of now, as a matter of fact. And after this episode, I'm going to charge my camera and record a yet another bonus episode that I intend to be lighthearted and fun. And I'm not being facetious, or because of the way it's spelled, I'd like to say facetious. I'm not being facetious. I need a little palate cleanser because this episode's going to be probably a little bit heavy because I'm talking about some heavy history and some heady definitions of things that affect your life directly, definitions of words that you hear often and have heard for the majority of your life that perhaps, and it's by no fault of your own, but it is for certain reasons, words whose definitions have been obscured and twisted, particularly if you live in these United States of America. I live in the US of A. I always have. Yeah. So let me go back to this. It's the first they came for, talking about the spread of fascism in Germany and Austria, how this thing creeps up. And again, it's going to sound a little different than you may have heard before, but this is the direct translation from the German poem written by Martin Niemöller, Haus Berlin Dahlem. That's a long name. Here it is, yet again. When the Nazis came for the communists, I kept quiet. I wasn't a communist. When they came for the trade unionists, I kept quiet. I wasn't a trade unionist. When they locked up the Social Democrats, I kept quiet. I wasn't a Social Democrat. When they locked up the Jews, I kept quiet. I wasn't a Jew. When they came for me, there was no one left to protest. That's the way this thing works. That's the way it's working right now in these United States of America. Fascism. But what exactly is fascism? According to Benito Mussolini, a fascist himself, perhaps you heard of him. If not, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of ground I'm going to cover, and I'm trying to keep this episode tight. I'm aiming for under 45 minutes, hopefully. So the reason I say that is I'm going to present some really big topics, really complicated topics. I'm going to do my best to present them in a concise and very easy to digest way. And I will be offering definitions and explanations that are as close to accurate as I can get. If you are interested in these things, I encourage you, if you're able to, take mental notes or whatever of names, words, and ideas for you to research later on, okay? And as you research, also research the source, vet the source that you are getting your information from. That's all I'm going to say. So, the man himself, Benito Mussolini, described in a very succinct manner, quote, "Fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is a merger of the state and corporate power," unquote. By state, we all know what corporate means. By state, we're not just talking about Texas, Alabama, New Hampshire. No, state as in a nation with a governmental authority. That is a state, all right? So again, Benito Mussolini said, quote, "Fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate powers," unquote. I have talked at length about this topic in episodes I made 6 or 7 years ago about, I forget which. I had a series that never really got completed. It was a lot of research and they were pretty long episodes. I don't even remember how many I made, and it was never really finished. It was a series of episodes on this podcast that I was calling New Age Nazis. And the aim was to explore and learn about the weird occult shit the Nazis were into. But it's not just limited to the Nazis. When you hear occult, you may think witchy people, you may think, progressive personalities. And yes, that is a thing. But occultism and occult interest is not just limited to any one particular leaning in terms of ideology, okay? So a lot of New Age, what's called New Age thought, really started growing. It became a big thing, like spiritualism in the early 1900s, that sort of thing, came from a lot of what we would describe as New Agey thoughts and theories and beliefs in the mid to late 1800s. And unfortunately, a lot of it was linked to nationalism and, in short, racism. There was a lot of racism involved because a lot of these, again, what we would describe loosely, I'm using an imperfect label here, New Age or New Agey type stuff back in those, late 1800s, a lot of it was tied to a certain aim of transcending this physical material world. And by transcending, don't get it so mixed up with transcendentalist writers. Although there was a bit of overlap. It was like a Big Tent thing, and a lot of different people with, different sympathies and perspectives picked and choosed from these woo-woo kind of ideas, okay? But it is inarguable. It's a simple fact that Hitler and Himmler and a lot of the personalities that would become the central figures, the makers of the Third Reich, believed a lot of weird stuff. And so the idea of, a master race kind of was attached to these more woo-woo ideas they had, that there's a master race, a superior race. They called themselves Aryan, which ironically makes no fucking sense at all, because the Aryans, going back to like proto-Indo-European stuff, Aryans literally are Indian people, like in India. So it doesn't make any fucking sense. And nothing about fascism, the thoughts and the excuses given for it, none of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. And that was a really difficult thing for me to wrap my head around. Like when I was doing these New Age Nazi episodes, covering the occult stuff, which if you've played any of the Wolfenstein video games, that's what that shit's about. It's about the Nazis and their weird occult shit they got into, okay? And that's also what a lot of, watch, what's his, Guillermo del Toro. He covers this stuff too in some of his movies. They were into some weird shit, dude, okay? And it was part tied to their idea of a master race that they called Aryans for some inexplicable fucking reason. And as I was doing those episodes, like I was, getting to a minute ago, there were so many conflicting thoughts and just total fucking nonsense that I was trying to, wrap my head around until it clicked for me that the entire framework that I was working with wouldn't fit onto onto the fascists' framework. Like they're working on a completely different framework. They're working in a different fucking reality that literally makes no sense. There's no logic to it whatsoever. And that continues to this day. So if you encounter things that seem conflicting and don't really make any sense, that's because there is no sense to be made. It is a different reality that these people live in, a completely different framework that, frankly, facts and reason, what is it? Logic and reason don't care about your feelings. They don't work with logic and reason at all. Okay? And also, fascists really hate being called fascists, because when they are faced with, quotes from figures of theirs or actions or beliefs from figures that they support, and they say you're being ugly or you're taking that out of context, even when you're putting something in full context, it makes them feel bad because they know it is an ugly, violent perspective, way of being, okay? So let's go back to this. Once again, Benito Mussolini, fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is the merger of state and corporate power. Gee, do you happen to know any countries in the world currently in 2025, maybe the entire time you've been alive, do you know any countries who basically are a merger of state and corporate power? Gee, I wonder, do you know any that fit that description? Okay, let's take another little turn. Someone else had something to describe fascism. There was this dude, Umberto Eco, who wrote this thing called Fascism. Umberto Eco was an Italian philosopher, novelist, and semiotician. I'm not sure. Oh, semiotics, symbols and symbiology, like Jacques Derrida. Again, if you don't know these people or these names, don't worry about it. Just go with me. Don't get hung up on one thing. Just go with me here. I will guide you. We're going on a crazy trail, babies, and I need some water to make sure we don't go off the rails. Give me just a second. All right. There is this dude. I love his name. It's just a cool name. Umberto Eco. Was a philosopher, novelist, and semiotician. First published in 1995, this essay called Fascism, or Eternal Fascism, 14 Ways of Looking at a Black Shirt. These are names of, whatever. Don't worry about it. This influential essay provides an analysis of fascism, a definition of fascism, and discusses the fundamental characteristics and traits of fascism, drawing on Eco's personal experiences growing up in Mussolini's Italy, his extensive research on fascist movements. The essay offers insights into the nature of fascism and its manifestations, because fascism has certain traits, and honestly, a single certain origin that comes down to the dissolution of capital. In short, fascism is the end form of capitalism, because capitalism has these inherent contradictions in it. And even pro-capital people will tell you, like, there's certain things that just don't work. It's not sustainable, okay? And once those contradictions become irresolvable, the people who try to protect capital act in fascist ways. And it may present differently. It may look a little bit different, but according to Eco, here we go, he outlines 14 key elements or traits, which he refers to as ways that commonly appear in fascist movements. While not all of these traits are present in every fascist movement, together they create a recognizable pattern. The essay is structured around these 14 ways, providing an in-depth yada, yada, yada. He argues that it's not possible to organize these into a coherent system, but that, quote, it is enough that one of them be present to allow fascism to coagulate around it, unquote. He uses fascism, or eternal fascism, as a generic description of different historical forms of fascism. The 14 points are as follows. Number 1, the cult of tradition, characterized by syncretism, even at the risk of internal contradiction. When all truth has already been revealed by tradition, no new learning can occur, only further interpretation and refinement. So once again, cult of tradition. Number 2, the rejection of modernism, which a lot of people will say, like, reject modernity, will attach this term cultural Marxism to it. Gee, have you ever heard that term before? Cultural Marxism? That was coined by Nazis. It views the rationalistic development of Western culture since the Enlightenment as a descent into depravity. Eco distinguishes this from a rejection of superficial technological advancement, as many fascist regimes cite their industrial potency as proof of the vitality of their system. Number 3, the cult of action for action's sake, which dictates that action is of value in itself and should be taken without intellectual reflection. This, Eco says, is connected with anti-intellectualism and irrationalism, and often manifests in attacks on modern culture and sciences. Say, for example, politicians responding to certain donors to remove the education of evolution in schools. This is anti-intellectualism. This is irrationalism. To try to remove stuff like, scientific, learned things like, adaptivity and evolution from school in favor of, Christian mythology. Okay. Number 4, disagreement is treason. Say, talk show host, or really, even if it's a super inoffensive, totally milquetoast talk show host, says something that is factually correct in a somewhat glib way. Say if there is a fascist leader in place, and if they feel embarrassed or a little bit humiliated or a little bit hurt, if their little fragile feelings are hurt, they may make certain moves to remove that really milquetoast, honestly, public figure and make a big deal out of it. This is number 4. Disagreement is treason. Fascism devalues intellectual discourse and critical reasoning as barriers to action, as well as out of fear that such analysis will expose the contradictions embodied in a synchronistic faith. Contradictions like, say, someone does something violent and bad, and it turns out that someone was a far right winger, okay? And it makes other far right wingers feel bad and icky, and they don't like it. So completely irrational, they say, well, that was a leftist. Even though factually the person that did the thing was like, no, I'm a right winger, I'm one of you guys. And the rest will say, no. That was a leftist. That was a Marxist. Okay? There's an example for you. Number 5, fear of difference, with which fascism seeks to exploit and exacerbate, often in the form of racism or an appeal against foreigners and immigrants. Say if someone says something like, say a white man says something like they wouldn't feel comfortable if they were on an airplane if the plane's pilot was a black person. Something like that, Number 5, appeal to frustrated middle class. And this is going to get to the seed behind it all, okay? Appeal to a frustrated middle class, fearing economic pressure from the demands and aspirations of lower social groups. We'll get into that in a second. Number 7, obsession with a plot and hyping up of an enemy threat. This often combines with an appeal to xenophobia, with a fear of disloyalty and sabotage from marginalized groups within a society, immigrants, people of different religions, people of different skin color, people of different, sexual, like queer folks or trans people, to say, they're a big threat. They're a big threat to our way of life. Echo also cites Pat Robertson's book, The New World Order, as a prominent example, yada, yada. Number 8, fascist societies rhetorically cast their enemies as, quote, at the same time too strong and too weak, unquote. Say, progressive people, they say, oh, progressives are so weak. They're a bunch of snowflakes. They cry about anything. They whine too much. But then at the same time say, they're out to get us. They're going to destroy us. They're an imminent threat. It's irrational. Okay? On the one hand, fascists play up the power of certain disfavored elites to encourage in their followers a sense of grievance and humiliation. On the other hand, fascist leaders point to the decadence of those elites as proof of their ultimate feebleness in the face of an overwhelming popular will. Number 9, pacifism is trafficking with the enemy, because life is permanent warfare. There must always be an enemy to fight. Both fascist Germany under Hitler and Italy under Mussolini worked first to organize and clean up their respective countries and then build war machines that they later intended to and did use, despite Germany being under restrictions of the Versailles Treaty, to not build a military force. This principle leads to a fundamental contradiction within fascism, the incompatibility of ultimate triumph with perpetual war. Number 10, contempt for the weak, which is uncomfortably married to a chauvinistic popular elitism, in which every member of society is superior to outsiders by virtue of belonging to the in-group. This is crazy. Eco sees in these attitudes the root of deep tension in fundamentally hierarchical structure of fascist policies, as they encourage leaders to despise their underlings, up to the ultimate leader who holds the whole country in contempt for having allowed him to overtake it by force. Number 11, everybody is educated to become a hero, which leads to the embrace of a cult of death. A cult of death, say, religious extremists who want to hasten forth the rapture, who do things, who genocide a group of people in hopes that perhaps it will make their myth fantasy come true, okay? As Eco observes, the fascist hero is impatient to die. In his impatience, he more frequently sends other people to death. Number 12, machismo, which sublimates the difficult work of permanent war and heroism into the sexual sphere. There's a lot of sex in this stuff too. Weird, abnormal, uncomfortable people who feel inferior. Their little fifis are very fragile. Fascists thus hold both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits, from chastity to homosexuality. Number 13, selective populism. The people, conceived monolithically, have a common will, distinct from and superior to the viewpoint of any intellectual. As no mass of people can ever be truly unanimous, the leader holds himself out as the interpreter of popular will, though truly he alone dictates it. Fascists use this concept to delegitimize democratic institutions they accuse of, quote, no longer representing the voice of the people, unquote. And last but not least, number 14, newspeak. Fascism employs and promotes an impoverished vocabulary in order to limit critical reasoning. A fascist movement need not exhibit every single one of these, but like Eco said, only one of these points needs to exist for fascism to congeal around it. And again, going back to a simple term, a quote from Benito Mussolini, fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is the merger of state and corporate power. The merger of state and corporate power also could be called neoliberalism. We'll try to do this quick. I'm going to go past the 45-minute mark, but I need water. So I'll be right back. Hang in there. And I'm back. And I've got definitions of words for you that I touched on at the beginning. There are definitions and terms that are very, very confused in these United States of America. When you hear conservatives and really far right-wingers talk about progressives or even centrists or stuff, they use the word liberals. Democrats are described as liberals. And by definition, Republicans are also liberals. Both parties in this disgusting two-party, actual one-party system we have in the US is a liberal system. Now, maybe when you hear the word liberal, you think someone who's like LGBTQ friendly and progressive, like socially progressive and this sort of thing. That's an obscurement, is that a word, of the term liberalism. Liberalism is this, okay? Actually, I'm going to go here. I found this Reddit post. Just go with me, but it's right. Someone here is confused. Posted 2 years ago, what do liberal and neoliberal actually mean? I'm just going to read part of this. Hi there. I've been an activist in the feminist movement for a while. The more I get to know new people in the movement, the more I realize how deeply ignorant I am in regards to politics. I know what I believe in, but I don't know what political labels mean other than the superficial definition. I tried to Google this stuff, but I'm still confused, so I'm here to learn. I've heard American right-wing politicians address the progressive left as, quote, liberals, unquote, in a pejorative way. So my basic understanding is that liberals believe in equality, right? Then a friend of mine, I believe she's a communist/anarchist, I'm not sure which, stopped hooking up with a guy because he was neoliberal. And the general consensus was that he was a bad guy. So, top comment on this is liberalism, here's the actual term here, is an ideology that emerged in the 17th century that generally promotes individual rights, private property, rule of law, democracy, and most importantly, capitalism. Modern liberalism is still all of that, but with a focus primarily on identity issues and a penchant for performative aesthetics rather than real change in material conditions. Okay, so that modern liberalism is the obscured or bastardized use of the word liberalism, okay? Neoliberalism is a conservative movement, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so economic liberalism here is a political and economic ideology that supports a market economy based on individualism and private property in the means of production. Private property here is not your iPhone, it's not your toothbrush, it is corporate entities. It is the Ford company. That means it is not owned collectively by the people, it is owned by an individual and their board. Okay, that's capitalism, all right? Adam Smith is considered one of the primary initial writers on economic liberalism, and his writing is generally regarded as representing economic expression in the 19th century liberalism up until the Great Depression and rise of Keynesianism in the 20th century. Again, don't worry about this stuff if you don't know these names. Note them, look them up later. Keynesian economics, okay? Historically, economic liberalism arose in response to feudalism and mercantilism, okay? Economic liberalism is associated with markets and private ownership of capital assets. Economic liberals tend to oppose government intervention and protectionism in the market economy when it inhibits free trade and competition, but tend to support government intervention where it protects property rights, opens up new markets or funds market growth, and resolves market failures. The bailouts, 2008 government bailout, okay? So a liberal thing is basically the government, and this touches on something I said at the beginning too, the government does not exist to help its people. It does not exist to protect or improve the living conditions of its citizenry, but instead exists to protect and serve capital and capital owners, the billionaires, okay? So, in that way, you could say it is the merging of corporate and state powers, that the state protects exclusively the corporations. All right? Let's see. It's an economy managed according to these precepts, may be described as a liberal economy or operating under liberal capitalism. Economic liberals commonly adhere to a political and economic philosophy that advocates a restrained fiscal policy and a balanced budget through measures such as low taxes, specifically on the 1%, low taxes, reduced government spending, okay, and minimized government debt, free trade, deregulation, tax cuts, privatization of, formerly social entities, labor market flexibility, and opposition. Here's the key thing: opposition to trade unions. These are common positions. All right. So, what does neoliberalism mean? You may have heard this. And again, Republicans and Democrats are both neoliberals. The establishment, like the majority of politicians that sway things, are neoliberals, okay? And they're called as such. Okay, here we go. In short, neoliberalism refers to the 80s and 90s. So Reagan really pushed it. It's Reaganomics. Resurgence of classical, or in this case, it's neoclassical, liberal economics, philosophy, and ideas. Limited government, laissez-faire economics say, oh, the market can fix everything. Leave it up to the market. The people, the owners of capital will do what's right, etc., is their thinking. These things were updated and modernized for contemporary times in reaction to the more welfarist, Keynesian, and interventionist policies and economics in the mid-20th century. So that would be the New Deal, putting huge restrictions, heavily taxing the top 1%, okay? Neoliberalism gets rid of that and goes back to no regulations, no safety net programs for the citizens. The government exists only to help out these corporations when they ultimately fail, because they are ultimately built and function on a system that is extremely unsustainable and destructive, okay? So it's neoliberalism can be considered to be the, quote, status quo, unquote, of the post-Cold War consensus in most countries across the world, where free trade, deregulation, the opening of markets, and the limiting and privatization of government services were promoted. However, since the 2008 crash, the consensus that should be a good thing has slowly fallen apart and has been challenged in many countries, including the U.S. itself, although many countries, political parties, and economists still cling onto it somewhat, nevertheless. So let's revisit this quote. Fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it is a merger of state and corporate power, quote unquote, from Benito Mussolini. It starts when capitalism is falling apart. It's the beast cornered and lashing out and abusing people and creating all this irrational, frothing at the mouth mania in people susceptible to such things, in order to continue its existence, because it is unsustainable. And the next step beyond capitalism would well, be something along the lines of theories that Marx and Engels proposed, which is why fascists always go after the left, the leftists. And don't get into shoehorn theory, don't get into left-right stuff. Marxism is a completely different framework from capitalism. It addresses the inherent contradictions, squares the circle or whatever the phrase is. So they always go after socialists, Marxists first, anti-capitalists. They always go after them first, okay? So let's go back to this thing. As you can see here from Martin Niemöller. When the Nazis came for the communists, I kept quiet. I wasn't a communist. When they came for the trade unionists, I kept quiet. I wasn't a trade unionist. When they locked up social democrats, I kept quiet. I wasn't a social democrat. When they locked up the Jews, I kept quiet. I wasn't a Jew. When they came for me, there was no one left to protest. It's market trying to protect itself. It's capitalism trying to protect itself, which is why so easily you see corporations bending the knee and acquiescing to the irrational will of the fascist leader or leaders. Okay? That's why that happens. So let's get to this cool woman. Lyudmila Pavlichenko. She was a Soviet sniper in the Red Army during World War II. She is credited with killing 309 enemy combatants, thus being considered as one of the deadliest snipers in history. She served in the Red Army during the siege of Odessa and the siege of Sevastopol, during the early stages of the fighting on the Eastern Front. After she was injured, yada, yada, yada. Okay. And then I'm going to skip over to this article that, paints her story in a, maybe more poetic way here. This website called History Today. Soviet super sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the, quote, guerrilla queen. Not guerrilla, but like, Cuban, the guerrilla fighter, queen of Soviet Russia, became a role model for women in combat during the Second World War. In 1942, Lieutenant Lyudmila Pavlichenko, a Soviet frontline sniper, was sent on a mission to convince U.S. and British allies to open up a second front against Hitler's forces. The guerrilla queen was feted at sites of bomb damage, munitions factories and shipyards, entertained at the White House and in Whitehall, addressing thousands. Her arrival in Washington, D.C., coincided with a historic moment of American-Soviet friendship, even while the press found the female sniper with her claimed totality of 309 German kills rather shocking. She sneered at their questions about makeup and clothes and asked why women factory workers were paid less than men and protested when barred from boarding a Royal Navy ship. The Red Army didn't fucking discriminate by gender. I'll tell you that right now. But Pavlichenko, whose frontline experience had earned her the right to such plain speaking, was actually the latest in a long line of Russian female combatants. Journalists had already forgotten the earlier fascination with the first Women's Battalion of Death, organized by Maria Bochkareva in 1917. The women's rights activist Florence Harriman had funded the Bochkareva's visit to the U.S. Capitol, where, in her military uniform, she had urged President Woodrow Wilson to finance an anti-Bolshevik military expedition. Interesting. Although Bochkareva's efforts were unsuccessful, the Bolsheviks executed her in Siberia in 1920. She had served as a powerful figure for the suffragettes, who believed that women's participation in combat would ensure their right to political engagement. During the Second World War, the British government would employ the Soviet female combatant. Okay, so even before USSR, Russia had been, they've been about women fighters. During the Second World War, the British government would employ the Soviet female combatant in their propaganda to encourage its own women to support the war effort, while the Americans appeared less enthusiastic about women's active military participation and regarded Pavlichenko with a mixture of awe and fear. She reminded them that Soviet female soldiers were not a quote-unquote novelty. In the U.S. Communist Party magazine, Soviet Russia Today, Pavlichenko wrote, "We women have a tradition, too, to live up to. There was Nadezhda Durova, the Russian woman guerrilla who fought against Napoleon's invading armies in 1812, and Dasha Sevastopolskaya, who fought in the heroic defense of Sevastopol in 1854 to 55. So, in today's war, our women have carried on these traditions and added something. That something may have been a bracing new form of womanhood that Pavlichenko appeared to embody, which would be required to win the war. Pavlichenko, who one reporter described as, quote, the first Amazon of the Red Army to visit the capital, unquote, began her tour as Britain and America were gauging women's potential for combat. Journalists struggled to reconcile the young, well-scrubbed Russian woman with the expert killer who bristled at questions about whether, quote, girls wear lipstick at the front line and what color do they prefer, unquote, and, quote, what color does Lady Pavlichenko prefer, and what color does she like, unquote. Equally objectionable were references to her, quote, high Russian boots, scarlet-trimmed khaki uniform, and figure which was considered, quote, a little plump, like most Russian women, unquote. Fucking ignorant bastards. Natural combatants. Pavlichenko disliked the trivialization of her military career and, by implication, of all Soviet women who had enlisted en masse to defend their country. When asked in Chicago why she had chosen such a profession, Pavlichenko reported with a reference to the Second Front, quote, gentlemen, I am 25 years old, and I have already managed to kill 309 of the fascist invaders. Do you not think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for rather too long, unquote? She implied that women were taking men's natural role as combatants, a situation which would be remedied when more of them enlisted. In reality, Pavlichenko's weapon training had begun before the war, along with thousands of other Soviet schoolgirls through a paramilitary sports organization. When the Germans invaded, Pavlichenko, quote, resorted to all kinds of tricks to get into the army, unquote, and served first in a destroyer squad to dispose of German paratroopers with the Red Army's 25th Rifle Division. She opened her sniper's tally during the defense of Odessa, which took place during the early phase of Operation Barbarossa, and, despite being wounded, soon increased to 187. Okay, so I guess she took 187 during that. After Odessa had fallen, she spent a further 8 months defending Sevastopol, where, with her partner, a crucial relationship as snipers trained and operated together, she destroyed an enemy observation point and regularly fought duels with German snipers. Her division was decimated, but she survived, albeit wounded, to be evacuated by submarine to Novorossiysk. Interesting. Pavlichenko's feats seemed such a pure form of female patriotic sacrifice that they won her not only the friendship of Eleanor Roosevelt, who hosted her at the White House, but other celebrities on her tour of America. Paul Robeson sang for the Soviet delegates, and at a reception, Charlie Chaplin remarked as he kissed Pavlichenko's fingers, quote, "It's just incredible that this little hand has killed Nazis, has scythed them down by the hundreds without missing at close range," unquote. She was featured on the cover of Soviet Russia Today with biographical details that conformed to an ancient female warrior tropes. In childhood, she was a, quote, tomboy and rather unruly in the classroom. I was keen on on sports of all kinds and played all the boys' games and would not allow myself to be outdone by boys in anything. That was how I turned to sharpshooting, unquote. The article urged Americans to support a second front, thus ensuring an enduring international friendship, which was immortalized by the folk singer Woody Guthrie in his 1946 song Miss Pavlichenko. When delegates landed in London, journalists were as ready for this Red Army girl sniper as she was for them. At a press event where she reviewed a Home Guard detachment on 5 November, she anticipated the same silly questions she suffered in America, so warned, quote, "I wear my uniform with honor. It has been covered with blood in battle. It is plain to see that with American women, what is important is whether they wear silk underwear under their uniforms. What the uniform stands for, they have yet to learn," unquote. She hoped that British women would prove more sensible. She ended up dying at age 58. Where was it? Death and Legacy. Of a stroke. Yeah. Buried in Novodevichy Cemetery in Moscow. Her son, Rostislav, is buried next to her. A second Soviet commemorative stamp featuring her portrait was issued in 1976. Boy, oh boy. Shit. This episode went way long. Okay. That's it. That's it for this episode. Thanks for tuning in. Consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/ThatThingWithJames. And yeah. History, terms, and one badass woman. The bonus episode, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to find some silly stuff to read. Lighthearted stuff. Easy stuff. And it's going to be a shorter episode. But that's all for now. I hope to catch you next time. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.